All right, it's just 1 minute past the top of the hour. So, a very good afternoon, a very good day to all of you, and a very warm welcome on behalf of the International Road Federation and on behalf of the African Development Bank to this webinar forming part of the Safe and Efficient Urban Mobility for Africa initiative. Donc, j'en profite pour saluer tout le monde et vous souhaiter la bienvenue à ce webinaire que nous organisons en partenariat avec la Banque africaine de développement dans le cadre de notre programme de mobilité sûre et efficiente pour les villes africaines. We are together for approximately 1 hour, and we will get started with a couple of practical aspects to ensure that the meeting is enjoyable and productive for all of you. A first consideration, we are particularly pleased to welcome our French-speaking colleagues. When you joined the session, you were asked to select your preferred language. You still have the option, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our colleagues from the interpretation pool. You have the opportunity to switch languages by visiting the settings of your Teams application, heading to language settings and changing the language. So everything is being translated into French, and you will be able to ask questions and receive responses indifferently in English and in French. So as I said, we are together for a little over an hour, between an hour and 20 minutes. It's a very deep topic that we're going to dive into. So we do want to give ourselves time or so to answer any questions that you have. You will be able, using the chat box throughout the session, to raise any questions, but also share observations and why not experiences from your respective cities. At the end of the presentation, we will also open up the microphones for more direct interaction with the presenter. I also want to highlight, you may have noticed, this session is in fact being recorded. So the recording will be shared with all of you, everyone who has signed up to the webinar, and we will also be including a link to download a copy of the presentation that will be delivered. As I mentioned earlier on, this webinar is being held in partnership with the African Development Bank, and a number of AFDB colleagues are on today's call, and I want to take this opportunity to extend our special welcome and thanks to them, and recognize their important efforts in the urban mobility and the urban development context in Africa. Indeed, there is a dedicated urban municipal development fund, which was established for this purpose. It has three main objectives: to provide expertise and technical assistance on demand to cities, provide support in helping them prepare and develop sustainable urban projects, and the fund is also involved in capacity building programs, such as the one which we are delivering today. In the chat box, we will be sharing some links. In particular, one of the links will be to the Urban and Municipal Development Fund website, of which is part of the AFDB portal, and you will be able to receive additional information on the objectives and indeed the opportunities that your respective cities have in terms of collaborating with the Urban and Municipal Development Fund. Set in the context, I think it's not necessarily a hard one to understand for all of us. This is a picture which is, neither an exaggeration nor, something that we would want to necessarily see going forward. We could spend quite a bit of time discussing what is wrong with what we are seeing in the kind of infrastructure and traffic patterns that unfortunately too often plague the development of African cities. There's an interesting statistic I came across earlier today in planning this webinar. The average vehicle ownership in many sub-Saharan African countries ranges between 40 and 50 vehicles per 1,000 population. And yet, as we can see, it is already a lot of, or a number of cities already struggling with these numbers. These same rates, these same motorization rates are closer to 500 to 800 vehicles in many parts of Europe and North America. We do have to ask ourselves how today's current system would cope if there were even 4 times the number of vehicles using it. So this is an important topic. It's an important challenge, and some would argue that it is, effectively a cornerstone of further economic and social development, bringing this urban planning and urban mobility under control and on a pathway to sustainability. Will this pathway give us a visual that looks somewhat like this? Well, who knows? But we do know, on the other hand, that in Africa, there are a number of opportunities to, I would say, benefit from the successes and the failures that we have seen maybe in other parts of the world, and in many cases to effect some technology leaps. There's new systems, new traffic management systems, new traffic planning software that may not have been available even 10, 15 years ago. How can they be weaponized in support of this sustainability pathway? And again, if all of this sounds a little futuristic, I want to highlight, once again, last week we heard from, in the context of our orientation webinar, we heard from a city in Tanzania, Tanga, and how they had developed a safe and sustainable transport action plan. And so they had taken many of these challenges and then broken them down into, let's say, bite-sized chunks, which they can try to address on a long-term basis. Our program was designed. This initiative that we are launching with the African Development Bank was designed with these objectives and this kind of context in mind. So it is a capacity building and mentorship service, which we are extending to all African participants. And that there are a few non-African groups also participating in today's event. So we'll be covering a number of practice areas that we've identified as being instrumental to achieving this objective. In terms of the workflow that we have set for ourselves, many of you participated in an orientation webinar last week. If you didn't, the proceedings, the recording are still available, and we will share them with you after today's session. We are following currently the first track in this program, which focuses more on the traffic engineering and management aspects. So today's webinar will start exploring this topic and will be followed by another webinar 1 month from now. There is a related track dealing with urban safety, traffic safety management, and we will invite you, we will convene you to a webinar on in February, in fact, next week on Wednesday, next week on the 8th of February, and this will be followed by another webinar again on the 8th of March. And the purpose of these webinars is to help you formulate city-specific and implementation-ready action plans, and these can be discussed in Accra as part of a number of workshops that we will be offering on April 25th. Why Accra, I hear you ask, or I don't hear you ask, but I can imagine that this is a reasonable question. We are in fact organizing our next IRF Africa Regional Congress in Ghana's capital from the 25th to the 28th of April. The workshops, which effectively form the end process for the initiative, will take place on April 25th as part of the Congress, and all of you who participate in this program will have complimentary access to the full Congress. So we invite you to take advantage of this opportunity. Those of you who are participating in the workshops will also have access to IRF certificates, which will be presented on this occasion, with a number of continuing professional development hours that may be helpful in some cases to maintain your certification. So we'll be providing additional information about this. All right, for now, before handing over to our track champion, Mr. Analyses, I just want to highlight a sentence which I didn't come up with it. It's a quote that I found on the African Development Bank's website, introducing the topic of traffic impact assessments and their guidelines. And again, we will provide you a link in the chat right now to those guidelines. So let me just quote from this statement. African cities have been multitasked to account for traffic congestion, lower delays, lower carbon emissions, and increase the accessibility of existing and new developments while contributing to cleaner air quality. And if you think about it, a lot of the challenges and therefore a lot of the solutions to urban mobility problems tend to be interrelated, and it's difficult to really address one without addressing the other. And indeed, there may be benefits in addressing them simultaneously. And that's really where traffic impact assessments can play a critical role in really making the most of these infrastructure developments to achieve multiple policy objectives at once, whilst simultaneously supporting a dialogue between cities, between private sector developers and other stakeholders. So guiding us through this process, I'm very pleased to welcome again for those of you who were part of the orientation webinar last week, because we heard from Adam, introduce the topic, which he's clearly very passionate about. So Adam is a senior project manager for traffic engineering at PTV Group, and he's got 18 years of industry experience in traffic modeling, studies and design. Adam, I understand you have managed and completed traffic impact analysis for both small and large mixed-use development projects, and you've also completed safety corridor, access management and traffic operations studies, both at the intersection but also at the city level scale. So without further ado, Adam, I would ask you to perhaps unmute yourself and to get started on our topic for the day. I see Naji has his hand up, so Naji, please let me also take this opportunity to introduce Mr. Naji Labi from the African Development Bank, who are our partners in the delivery of this program.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me and see my screen right now, and then I'll get started. Thanks to the wonderful introduction. I'm going to skip ahead a few slides so we can stay on target. And I'm going to skip ahead and talk about the course target group for this track.
Brandon, please, before getting to the presentation.
Yeah,
of course.
Yes, Brandon, we hear both English and the French. There is a problem or what? Second, I have 2 or 3 colleagues, they cannot connect. I don't know why.
Okay, we will assist with individual troubleshooting, and I just want to make sure that the interpretation is functioning. So again, if you have chosen French as your language track, what we are saying now should currently be translated into French. So perhaps someone can use the chat function to indicate that that is the case. And if you've chosen English, then normally you should be hearing the original language. So let me just check the chat.
Okay.
That we are not encountering any issues.
Please check, because I hear both you and the translator.
Okay. May I suggest, Naji, then that, and for those of you who are experiencing perhaps the same audio issues, to just check your language and speech setting. So that's in the that's in your team settings. Head over to language and speech, then select language interpretation, and then select whether you want original language, English or French. And this hopefully should address the issue.
I check this and
if there are any, of course, and if there are any issues, for any colleagues who are unable to connect, please notify us by email, by WhatsApp, and we will do our best to assist with them.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naji. And Adam, I apologize. Over to you.
Nope, no problem. All right, so this course is going to target 4 main groups here, 4 personas. We have government agencies. Those are cities. That could be a region or somebody like that who has the authority to approve the TIAs. And then there's the TIA consultants. This could be engineers, planners, architects that are assisting with the TIA and setting it up. But also we're looking at the persona of the private developer, and that's the person, you know, they're investing a lot of money to build something. So it's very important that the TIA that is being completed and done also respects their interests, but also respects the interests that the agencies have as well. So all of these personas have to work together, and we're going to focus on this in the group. Okay. And then for the course reference, we have a great manual that was put together by the different groups here. So with this manual, I'm going to post the link into the chat, so you will have it if you don't have it already. There it is in the chat channel. We're going to base this course very closely with this manual, so that way you can have a reference and then the slides to go hand in hand at the end of this presentation. Okay. And then today's agenda. Hello, is there a question? Or do we need to mute participants or something? Okay. I'll continue on.
The mute function has been activated, sorry.
Okay, yeah. So today's agenda will talk about, again, just the background of what a traffic impact analysis is. We'll talk about the different study levels of this analysis, and we'll get into the outline and kind of how to construct these analyses. We'll talk about a data collection plan, and as well look at what are the existing and opening year analyses for these types of studies. It's a lot of information, so let's try to kind of speed through it as fast as we can. And of course, you'll have the PDF after the presentation if you have any other wishes to look into the information. For the next workshop, we'll continue from the existing analysis, getting into the proposed development, and then future years and mitigations of any issues and problems that might occur from adding the extra traffic to maybe a system that's already constrained or something like this. So that will be all part of the next workshop in March. And as we already talked about the rules, feel free to post questions into the chat, and we'll have a Q&A at the end as well. So what is a traffic impact assessment? A traffic impact assessment is this official process that looks how a proposed development can work with an adjacent transportation system. So that's kind of the big definition of what it is. But the points of it is to ensure safe operations within the area and make sure that this development fits with the future traffic growth that is anticipated where this development will be built. And the study shows how the development responsibly integrates into this area from various modes of transportation, including pedestrians, bicycles, and public transport. So the main objectives of this TIA is to identify impacts for all of these modes, and also determine if these impacts are significant enough that they need to be avoided, managed, or mitigated. And that's really the main purpose of this document and of this study. You can see with the cycles of the TIA on the right-hand side of the screen that it starts with the proposed development in this conceptual stage, and then it also ends to the building of this proposed development or the study being approved for this proposed development. So the proposed development and the land developer, I mean, you're kind of in that key role from the beginning to the end of the process here. So that's a very important role. The benefits of a TIA is to look for the private and public stakeholders and look out for them. We want to minimize the risk and harm that may happen to any persons, going to and from the development or using the facility, and also make sure that we're looking out for property as well for all the users. The TIA improves how we access the site. So vehicle drivers, delivery trucks, public transport vehicles, and again, pedestrians and cyclists, we need to look on how this is improved for them, the way they use the site. And we need to balance all of the benefits, delays, and desires and needs that each of these modes have. The TIA integrates the development, like I said, into the site, but it does it in a way that respects the local policies that are in place and makes sure that it fits within those policies. That's a very important part of the TIA. So to make sure that the agency is being respected and represented there. And importantly, there's a lot of costs and construction of improvements that could be made from a TIA study, the mitigations to the roadway, adding a traffic signal, something like this. So the TIA helps ensure that this public money and private money is spent correctly on the right things and make sure the problems actually do get solved. So where do we apply the TIA? Well, I mean, there's two basic requirements for this. A TIA should be applied when you're improving an existing development or piece of infrastructure, like a roadway or something, but you can also apply a TIA on proposed new developments. So that would be a new office building or maybe a new highway line or new intersection or something like this. That's where you can apply TIA studies on both existing things being improved and proposed things coming in the future. Now, development projects, I mean, this includes building of residential, commercial, industrial buildings and sites and zones. And these can be very small up to very large in size. And we'll talk about the size and how the size plays a role into the scope of your TIA study. And in this course, we'll mainly focus on the development side of a TIA, not so much on the transportation project part or the environmental part. We'll mostly focus on the development side. But just for reference, the transportation projects here, I mean, this is public infrastructure improvements from roadway to intersections to public transport. This could even go into multimodal or intermodal connections with airports, shipping yards, something like this. That's an example of the transportation side. And why a TIA is important for transportation projects as well is that there's always this classic example of you're working on a freeway or a highway and there is congestion at a bottleneck. And as soon as you do a project that fixes that congestion at the bottleneck, then traffic is released downstream somewhere and just causes problems at the next interchange or the next intersection downstream. And so the purpose of the TIA is to ensure that we just don't move the problem somewhere else. We try to mitigate the problem reasonably and of course reduce impacts along the way. So that's the purpose of TIAs for transportation projects. And then again, for environmental projects, this could be another place to apply a TIA. These are just to make sure that we're meeting the measures and policies and that we're not having negative impacts to the community through air pollution, noise pollution, and then just the visual intrusions that may happen due to certain projects. Okay, let's continue on since we're already a little bit behind from the beginning. So we're going to move into our next segment here into proposed developments and study levels. The first thing before you even really start your scope is to understand what you're doing. So this requires communication with the developer, with the land developer, to understand what they're doing with that site. And you need to know what the construction schedules are for that site. How many years out will this occur? And will the site be built in phases? Will you do one part first and then another part second? So all of that's critical to understand. And then you also need to work with the agencies in the beginning to coordinate if they have any other build-out schedules for adjacent projects in the area. Maybe they reviewed somebody else's traffic impact assessment and they want to coordinate with your traffic impact assessment. Also, they may have planned projects in the area that could happen at the same time you're building your site. So they need to make sure everything is planned accordingly and meshes together. And then also, again, like I was saying, you need to understand the development. Sometimes this is a chicken and egg process. Private developments may have a really nice design and size as you get into it. It's all specified for you by the time you get it. But often you sometimes just get an empty box. Like you say, we're developing houses on this lot, and there's really no plan on where the driveway connections might be or something like that. So you need to ask questions to understand what are the developer's wishes, how the space will be used, or how does the developer want the space to be used? What's the size of the space and how many units might be put into the space? Those are questions that you need to know to decide what level of TIA analysis you have to do. Okay, so then when you understand these developers' wishes, you can complete what's called an area statement table. And this looks up the land use categories for what you're putting into your development site. And then the size and quantity of units are used to calculate the number of trips that your development site will generate. And then these trips, it's basically anything going to the site, any mode is considered a trip. But later on, we'll go into more detail in workshop 2 on the modal splits of these trips and how to reduce trips and things like that. That's a further topic in workshop 2. But for right now, this land use table that we put together will then help us determine the size of a TIA. So the size is based on the total amount of trips that your site can generate. And then you look at this, you look at these levels, level 1, level 2, level 3, compare it to what your site's generating, and you say, my TIA fits into one of these levels. All agencies kind of do this a bit differently, so make sure you check the thresholds, the requirements with your agencies to see if where your TIA fits and to what level it fits in. So make sure you double check. But for example, we're using the manual that I posted in the chat, and so they're saying low impact sites are trips that are less than 100 trips made in a peak hour. So this type of site may be a small shop or maybe a small housing development, and that's kind of a low impact analysis that needs to be done. So level 1 lists the core TIA requirements that you need to study. And then as you get into a higher level, more and more requirements are added to that base level. So for example, level 2, this could be maybe a small office building, maybe a restaurant, maybe a supermarket, a small supermarket. It's producing trips maybe between 100 and 500. As that happens, the TIA study area increases. You're starting to look at more intersections that may be impacted by your site. And then by the time you get into level 3, which is the high impact analysis, this could be a hospital, this could be a large mixed-use development, like a shopping mall, maybe an office, a larger office building. Here, the study area increases a lot. And the guidelines for level 3 from this manual is that where traffic contributes, or traffic contributions, that you need to study to where they're no more than 5% of the background traffic. Okay, so it's a big requirement to kind of know ahead of time, like, well, how am I supposed to know how many intersections out contributes 5% more than my background traffic at the initial step of my analysis? So it's a big concept to understand in the beginning. But yeah, so that's the high impact analysis, and then you start getting more and more intersections, and that will also increase the cost of a TIA as you get higher and higher category. So land developers need to make sure that if they have a consultant, to make sure they understand that once you get bigger and bigger, the costs go up and up. So once you understand the level of TIA and you kind of know the general framework that you're working with, it's always good to make sure you understand and document these assumptions. And I'll go into these assumptions right here. You want to document, one, the level. You want to document any ideas that you might have on modal splits of the trips. Are they coming by bike? Are they coming by pedestrians? By foot, I guess? Are they coming by public transport? You want to document the area statement that you put together. But after you collect all of this information, please create a project memo of assumptions and get this memo approved by the agency. You'll have a pre-agency meeting, and I'll talk about that in a second. This memo can go to them and say, these are my assumptions. Do you agree with my assumptions? Let's move forward with clear communications based off of these assumptions. So make sure you establish this project memo. During your pre-meeting that you may have with the agency, or you should have with your agency, verify the scope understandings, verify the outline that you think you should have for this study based off the guidance and based off of local requirements. Agree on the future year that you're studying based on the start date of the development. Agree on the intersections that you'll be looking at. Again, if you have that high impact area, by agreeing on these intersections, it kind of makes everyone aware that you're looking at these limits, right? So there's no surprises at the end. You won't have the agency come back and say, well, why didn't you look further out? They could still do that, but at least you kind of have a basic understanding in the beginning. And you also want to take a look at land uses and zoning. Sometimes some agencies document these very well, and the information is accessible to know what land use is what and what zoning is what. But other times agencies don't have this information available. So the last thing you want to do is to propose a development with one land use on a site that has another land use and get really far down the process only to determine that you can't build a site there. So make sure everyone understands that your land use and the approved land use from the agency, so there's no confusion. And then also, when in doubt, if you have any questions, just ask. I mean, this is probably a theme of this presentation, is when in doubt, ask a question back to the agency so everyone has a clear understanding of the policies, procedures, and what to do. All right, so what are the components of a TIA? So there are 12 components or 12 sections that are in chapter 3 of the manual that I shared. And the first row is basically kind of like project setup, existing analysis, data collection stuff. It's really the background information to get you started. And then the second row is more about the proposed site, the development, and how that contributes traffic on top of the existing. And then the third row here, this is all the reporting, all of the mitigation, identification of future impacts. That's all down on the third row of the TIA here. Much of these components are going to be part in this workshop, so I won't go through each one individually, but they're listed here, and they're also listed in the manual if you want to take a look. But every scope, every TIA level hits these impacts, hits these components more or less. So the level of detail changes a little bit based on the TIA level, but they all have these sections. So then in chapter 4, your outline will have those sections listed as chapter headers in the outline. And then underneath those chapter headers, there are subsections, and that's what I'm saying the level will determine those subsections most often. And I can't stress how important this is to know your audience, I guess. Through experience, you kind of learn your agency a little bit better, and specifically what that reviewer is requiring for a traffic impact analysis. They may have specific ways and specific figures, styles, and formats that they really like to see. And if you submit something slightly different, they may make you redo that figure or redo that section of the report. So really know your audience and get to know your reviewer. And again, ask questions, and when in doubt, say like, how do you want to see this, and how much detail do you really want to see in this section? So those are always good questions to ask if you don't know your reviewer. It seems like there's a question about we can't see the projection. Is that true? Is it blocked, the screen share?
It's something that I'm in the process of addressing, Adam. It looks like perhaps we spotlighted your camera, perhaps not realizing that by doing so, it would be eating into the screen. So hopefully this issue has been addressed now. Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I want to talk about also site access and circulation of your site before we actually get into the data collection part of the TIA. Because knowing how your site works and how it circulates will influence how you collect data later on. So this is a really, really good point to say, understand this first before you go out and start collecting data. Of course, there could be changes later, but having the best understanding initially is always good. Also be aware that there may be local policies or rules, such as restrictions to how many driveways this particular highway or road could have. And maybe there's a special rule that access to your development has to be off of a side road or a feeder road, something like this. Knowing that kind of information will help you determine the site circulation and access. Other policies might be the spacing between access points. So if you already have a bunch of driveways on the roadway, maybe the next driveway for your development has to be a certain distance from the last, or maybe a certain distance away from the intersection itself. So having an understanding of the access spacing will help you. Let's move forward and kind of show this through an example. For instance, maybe the architect came in and laid out the buildings and put in some driveways. And to the architect, it looks great. They they like the way the building aligns with the sun or something. I've worked with some architects where they really are into the sunlight on the building itself. But that may not balance the site as far as a circulation perspective. And maybe the driveways that the architect put in their sketch and mock-up will never actually get built because, again, like I said, there might be some spacing requirements. There could be some, access restrictions due to a median on the roadway or right in, right out. Something like that. There could be some issues with emergency services. They need to come in off the main road and not come in off the side road. Those are the things that an engineer and the person doing the traffic impact analysis will need to look at. And again, understanding all of these aspects will definitely inform you where to collect data. If you are assuming that your driveways are going to be on the main street and all of a sudden they're on a parallel street or a side street, then you have to collect data in another location. Also, the circulation on the site needs to be balanced to everyone's wishes. We need to make sure these modes are all represented. We saw from Brendan's picture that there's not as many cars as maybe people or bicycles in an area. So we need to make sure that our site fits the local conditions, as well as make sure that the site will fit the future conditions that are being projected. One example of kind of like, I guess, local differences, is I'm living in Germany right now, even though I'm from the United States. But in Germany, I noticed that often there are walking paths that they're painted onto the pavement in parking lots. So it kind of corrals the pedestrians safely along certain routes within the parking lot. That way they're not wandering through the parking lot, which is a very American thing to do. It's just to go wherever you want in a parking lot. So that's how they handle that. And it actually does safely put people in the right place, and everyone can predict where these pedestrians are supposed to be in a parking lot. So that's addressing site circulation for a pedestrian need and also for a vehicle need. And vice versa, US is a little bit better than Germany when it comes to how parking can flow and large trucks can circulate through the site, mostly because they sometimes have more room to do these things. But yeah, in that case, I think sometimes it's safer the way the vehicles and the way the trucks can flow through the site due to the size that they put into the parking lot. Also, connections to public transport. I mean, this is going to be a very important issue. Again, if the architect aligns the building with the sun, but it doesn't align the walking path from the bus stop to the place of business, then there's a disconnect. And that means the pedestrian will have to walk farther, and potentially that could cause more issues and safety concerns. So we need to make sure that everything's connected the way it needs to be connected. And that goes with bicycle routes. It doesn't make sense to have bicycle parking at your site if there's really no safe bicycle route or connection to your site. So you just need to balance all of these issues. Now with parking, I'm not really going to cover it just for the sake of time. But in chapter 3.5, there's a lot of good tips on parking and how to align the spaces and make sure the flow internally is set up properly. So it's a good chapter if you're interested in the internal circulation. All right, so now with my next section, this is on data collection plans. So after you understand the site circulation, as we talked about, the next thing to do is to look at the data collection. And I've always told people this is kind of a game that you have to play. The goal is to collect the right amount of data, not too much data, but also not too little data. And I mean, it really does take some experience and local knowledge to figure this out. But it's definitely a game here. Remember, if your development site is a TIA level 3, you're going to need to collect enough data to find out where this development traffic is not adding 5% extra traffic to the total amount of the existing. So that could be a very large area. So you just need to be prepared that you have enough data to address that issue. And if your project scope requires a traffic simulation, sometimes you need to prove that certain things work, or agencies may want to see a traffic simulation. You need to make sure you have enough data for additional intersections to properly seed in the vehicles into your traffic model and stuff like that. So just be aware that, you know, the TIA may require this amount of intersection, but the traffic study may require more on top of that. Also, if your mitigations in the future, that may require more traffic than what you had in the existing condition. So if you're rerouting traffic downstream further and it's making a U-turn because maybe a turn's restricted or something, that's yet maybe another intersection or two that you have to collect. Some agencies have great data sets. I'm not really quite sure on the condition of the data sets where you live, but some agencies have great data. You can supplement their data with your data, and that's nice if that works out for you, but others don't have such great data sets. So agencies may require you to count everywhere. So make sure you have enough budget, make sure you have enough time to get all of these counts if you need to do something like that. And again, when in doubt, if you don't know what data is available to you at that pre-project meeting, ask about the available resources and ask if you can use them for your TIA. Now, some data tips. Good data can increase, of course, the upfront cost of your project if you have to collect it. But on the back end, I have found through experience, you can save a lot of time. So during this process of processing of the data, if you have collected a lot, this helps you with your justification. This helps you with your report. You usually write a smaller report if you don't have to defend your results due to bad data, or maybe you don't have to write as much on all of your assumptions and how the data meshed and fit together. So there's that old, that old phrase, garbage in, garbage out. So this is kind of true with bad data. So you put bad data into your study, you're probably going to get a bad decision out of your study, okay? And the last thing you want when you're doing a TIA is to submit a draft or final report to the agency, and then the agency comes back with a comment like, well, why didn't you just collect a count there? And why are you meshing these two data sets together? Because that's not, if they do that, then they're not believing your results, and they can end up not accepting your TIA. And you'll have to get more data, or you'll have to redo a study and report, or come up with new findings and new mitigations. And by doing that, you're going to waste a lot of money, and you may have some unhappy people with your TIA study. So if you think you need to collect more data, I mean, like I said, it may increase the upfront costs, but it will also make you sleep better, knowing that you have this data, because it will increase the chances of approval for the TIA. So just kind of take that under consideration. Okay. So a data collection plan, this documents the count locations that you're planning to have for your TIA, the times you're going to collect this, what data is coming from existing sources, what data is coming from your counted sources, where are you going to collect travel times, all of this type of information. The classic rookie mistake or lessons learned tip here is make sure your data collection plan matches the purpose of your development. You need to really match that typical operational day, right? I guess an example, maybe it doesn't relate to you as so much because you don't have snow, but if you have a lot of snow and you're collecting data for a ski resort or something like this, or a development near a ski resort, you don't want to collect your data during the off season where there's no snow and the skiers aren't coming to the ski resort. That doesn't make sense. You want to collect the data during the peak time, which is when skiing is happening. Another example is if you're doing an impact study for a new school, don't do your traffic counts at 5 to 6 p.m. Maybe you need to study the traffic counts at 2 to 3 p.m. where this is the release time for that school. So you need to make sure what you're doing in your data collection matches the study. Okay, the data coverage, again, this really depends on what you can get from your agency and what you can get from the field. But you should create a map that represents this, as you can see in the picture here. This map will show like where your turn movement counts are at the intersections, maybe where your segment or roadway counts are between the intersections, and you can have all that represented on a map. You can notice like on this map, as you get further away from the development site, it goes from what we're collecting in the field to maybe some historic counts. You could possibly do that and maybe get away with that for your TIA. But it's probably best to have counts that you're collecting on site in the field very close to your development site. And then lastly, don't forget to collect different modes like bus schedules and things like this as part of your data collection strategy. All right, let's go into our last segment today. I think we're on time to leave some time for TI or for questions at the end, so that would be good. Okay, so after you get all of your data and everything's collected, that's one thing, but then you want to document the existing conditions for your site. So you'll create a base or background analysis of the site, and this will include an extensive log of photographs, of maps, of figures, everything that you put together to document how the site is present day. And this will also like document the concerns you might have in the field. So maybe the pavement's cracked, or there's issues with parking already, or something like this. Like with parking, I mean, you can look at, there's issues with legal parking, and there's also issues with not legal parking, for example. Where public transportation connections are, you can document, what's the peak usage time, what's the headways between buses and things like this, just so you know later during your mitigation process these answers to these questions. So make a record with this documentation of what is happening before you put the development in the ground, because this is going to protect your study. This will protect the developer, which is a reason why the TIA is conducted. It also protects the land developer. But also, in the event that there's a dispute between the agency and the land developer, having this existing record is also very useful. All right, so then after you conduct your counts, you need to kind of process them and merge these counts together. And by doing that, again, that's kind of something you learn through experience, and it's an art form. You need to find the common peak periods between intersections on these counts. You can classify the vehicles from, these are small vehicles, these are trucks, these are really big trucks from these counts. So that's all through the count processing. You'll also find factors such as the peak hour factor, which you'll put into traffic capacity software. If you have right turn on red volumes, that will also go into traffic capacity software. If you're using historical counts such as AADTs, or the average annual daily traffic, there's often adjustment factors that go with these, such as like a way to adjust this count to a season or a weekday or an hour. You need to know those things. And if you don't know those things, hopefully your agency's planning department knows those things. And if they don't know those things, then you're probably going to have to do a manual count at that location in your data collection plan. Keep in mind, if you are using historic data sources during this counting processing, they may be like 2 years old, right? So they may have performed that count 2 years ago. This count should be scaled up to match what you're collecting in the field by 2 years, or scale up or scale down if traffic is actually less. So you need to keep that in mind. But if at the end of this, again, document this merge process and document all of the assumptions that you made during this count processing. Another thing you can do with counts is count balancing. And then this comes up like if you have two intersections on a corridor, and maybe there's parking between the two intersections with a lot of turnover, or you have a driveway that will sync traffic or source traffic, that's what they call it, which is basically add or subtract traffic to the network. You can come up with an imbalance between the counts. If this happens, and if you have an imbalance between your counts, you can just make an assumption that this driveway is, or these parked cars are actually consuming traffic, and just live with it, I guess. There's an art to kind of balancing, this and making these assumptions. But you want to make sure if you're doing count balancing that you do it correctly and do it right and it's logical, because sometimes people do this count balancing because they didn't count a major intersection or a major driveway, and they assume things incorrectly, and it really just creates artificial queuing and more problems down the line. So the rule of thumb is if you have a major intersection between, or a major driveway between intersections, you should go out and also count it and just get it done. Okay, and after you have your counts processed, your counts balanced, everything's adjusted, and it looks pretty and nice, you can create an existing count map for your report. A lot of agencies require count maps so they can quickly see, the volumes on the map at the intersection, all the different movements, and then also compare a morning peak hour with an evening peak hour or a noon peak hour. So all of this is done on your existing count map. And this will also help your traffic model when you put them into your traffic model later, the counts and volumes. You can quickly reference this figure and then type in the traffic volumes into your traffic software. Then after you're comfortable with your existing counts, configuration, and you made all your adjustments, and everyone's happy with it, you can scale this up to your opening year traffic or no build traffic. So this is the traffic in the future when the development is opened, but does not include the development. So it's your base background traffic for opening year. All right, so with this, you need a growth rate from, again, the agency planner or somebody like this will have a growth rate that says this region or this city at this location will grow traffic by, let's say, like 2% per year or something like this. And so if your opening year is a couple of years off, you would say 2% per year. Well, it's 2% year one, 2% year two. And then that's how much my existing traffic will grow into my opening year traffic. However, the caveat is growth rates can be expressed as linear, or they can also be expressed as compound. So you have to be really careful what that 2% means per year. If it's linear, you just apply it, 2% this year, 2% that year, and sum it together. But if it's compound, you're going to have to use the compound formula for that growth rate. So just be careful that you understand what that growth rate means. The other thing is you could be given a factor, which is not a growth rate, it's a factor. So for example, it's 2 years between your existing and opening year, and you may be given a 2-year factor by your agency, and they say your growth factor is 1.04. And so that's basically representing a linear growth of 2% per year when you get a growth factor of 1.04. Okay. So just be sure you understand that. It's also important to ask the question, depending on the usage of your site, will heavy vehicles or pedestrians or bicycles or buses have a different growth rate than what is given to you as this average or overall growth rate? One thing that's often overlooked is the pedestrian growth rate. I don't actually really see this a lot on a lot of models I review. I always ask that question, like, are the pedestrians growing or are they staying the same? Because that doesn't usually make sense. If you don't actually represent this pedestrian growth rate and you start getting into your future impacts, you're going to have a different look on, a stop controlled intersection. If you add more pedestrians to a stop controlled intersection and they're crossing the street without certain protections, it's going to create an unsafe situation. So it's very important to consider pedestrian growth when you're looking at that particular incident. For traffic signals, for instance, adding pedestrians to the traffic signal may conflict with a right turn or a left turn, having the pedestrians go through a crosswalk. And that's going to maybe decrease your capacity at a traffic signal. And I would say probably the worst case thing is if you build a roundabout. That's a lot of infrastructure to build the road for a roundabout. You're putting a lot of things that is very sensitive to capacities into the ground, or at least flows of capacities. And if you have a pedestrian growth, a huge pedestrian growth, and it starts crossing a crosswalk in front of a particular movement in a roundabout, and that movement is blocked because of the pedestrians, you're going to have complete roundabout failure. So definitely make sure you consider those specific individual growths from each class of vehicle and your multimodal growth. And we're wrapping up here. We're getting pretty close to the end, and a couple more slides. Summarize your opening year, just like you did your your existing year. This opening year, like I mentioned, is the foundation of comparison for the TIA. You're going to compare everything with the development there back to this opening year to see if there's any problems or issues with your new development. I'm not going to get into this too much about the capacity analysis methods. Hopefully you have a background in this. If not, there is a little bit in the manual about the highway capacity manual and how capacity analyses are conducted. Just really quick, the highway capacity manual, or HCM, it has deterministic procedures to calculate a level of service for a roadway or a traffic signal or a stop sign. The level of service is kind of like a letter grade of operation. So it's an A, B, C, D, E, F of operations. And A is good, F is bad. So with the highway capacity manual, some agencies use it as is. Some agencies have slight modifications to it. So just always ask, what are these analysis methods that you need to use? For capacity analysis software, this may take the highway capacity manual and put it into software. So the software will then run all the calculations for you. And those metrics or KPIs that the software produces will then go into your report. Make sure you use the software that is approved by your local agency. Some agencies don't care. Other agencies really want to use a specific software. So make sure you ask again in that pre-scoping meeting if you don't know. Just by experience, using the wrong software is not a good thing. You have to rerun all of your analyses again. But this software should enable you to create scenarios from your existing to opening year to any mitigation that you might want in the future year. Make sure it's scenario compatible. Make sure it enables you to distribute and assign traffic all over your study area, as well as document this area statement. Also, to be called capacity software, it needs to calculate capacities. Some software actually doesn't do that. So just be careful. So yeah, pick your software wisely. And kind of how the software fits into this. From the existing year analysis, you're looking at building up the existing year in your traffic model. You're looking at the geometry of the roadway. So this can come from a base map. And mostly everything comes from a base map, like an aerial photograph, and then you draw off the aerial photograph. But then you can supplement that information with field photos, surveys. Google Street View was my favorite until I moved to Germany, and now that's restricted everywhere. So if you have Google Street View and it's up to date, it's a lifesaver. But that can help you build your existing geometry. Traffic volumes, again, that comes from that count map that you put together, as part of your data collection. And the junction controls, so signal timings for traffic signals, this will come from your agency most likely, hopefully. If not, you need to find out how you're going to get that signal timing information. And, then you can also look on the base map and field observations for roundabouts and for stop signs to see how they're configured. And with that existing configuration, then you can go into your opening year analysis using that same model. You just create a new scenario, and then you can bump up your traffic, or like I said, decrease your traffic if there's actually a decline in the area, which is possible. But you will adjust the traffic to the opening year. But you should ask yourself a couple questions at the opening year for your analysis. One will be, 2 years out between my existing and opening year, will the traffic signals in my study area actually be optimized in opening year? Will the agency go out and, tweak some signal timings, something like this? Some agencies may, some agencies may not, and you just need to know and ask that question. And you need to know if there's any funded roadway improvements that need to be included. For example, you don't want to find out if there's a new signal in your study area from the newspaper. You kind of want to know ahead of time. Make sure that's included in the opening year if it needs to be included. Other common things other than traffic signals are like turn lanes or something like this that could be added later on between existing and your opening year. And your agency should know if these kind of projects are on the books, so to speak. And then the last question, of course, you got a growth rate from the agency, but did it actually include that fast food restaurant that's opening next year down the road from you? So you want to make sure that all of that growth is accounted for. Okay, and when you get all of these answers and everything figured out, then you can do that opening year analysis. And here's our last slide that we have. With this existing and opening year analysis, I have to say again, this is the basis to everything you're going to be doing and the next, for the next steps, which we'll cover also in the next workshop. So you need this foundation to be kind of bulletproof, more or less. You need to make sure it stands up and you're happy with it. So because it's the basis of your comparison. And like I was saying before, this is going to protect the developer from understanding, like the responsibility that they're going to have with these mitigations. So in this picture here on the screen, existing year has, less traffic, but opening year is completely congested with traffic. Is it the developer's responsibility to fix it? Probably not. Will they be on the hook to fix it if they can't properly prove this, and maybe the study is slightly flawed or something? It could be they may have the responsibility to fix more than they should. So yeah, again, to protect your, if you're a consultant, to protect your client, you want to make sure that your opening year reflects exactly what needs to happen, and that way the developer pays for the problems that they're causing, not for the problems that are already there. So that's wrapping up kind of segment 1 for this class. And like I said, segment 2 will take it from existing analysis, and we'll start looking at trip generations and how we're going to apply this to future scenarios, and then how to fix all of the future problems. So, and I'll stop right here and I'll open it up for any questions that we might have.
Thank you very much for that, Adam. You've set some excellent foundations, and indeed we are going to open up for questions and hopefully a couple of answers at the end. I see a couple of hands are up. You can either raise your hand and I'll unmute you. You can use the chat function as well. So whichever is most convenient with you. Maybe I can start off with one of my own whilst other questions come in, and I see we have a couple as well. So One, listening to you and thinking about, what we know about kind of galloping motorization rates and this kind of rapidly shifting urbanization trends in many African countries, how robust would you say is the TIA process, the TIA model to, I guess, situations where traffic is increasing exponentially? You indicated, of course, you can enter a 2% expected growth rate, but the model also requires it founded, and you explained this very clearly, on an understanding of your AADTs and how these are established over several years, and what happens when you have, again, multiple developments taking place at once, and the potential for these let's say the demand for those streets to increase dramatically from one year to the next.
Yeah, I would say, as a process, and actually as the manual identifies, I mean, it's a very flexible process and it adapts to the situation. Unfortunately, I would say a lot of the responsibility is on the agency to provide good information from the beginning. So if an agency has a really robust planning model and they are in touch with all of their stakeholders, all of the partner agencies, and they know we're growing here, we're declining here, and really look out for this investment there, that will help the TIA process. And if that doesn't exist, then it's the person conducting the TIA really has to do their homework, and but it's really only as good as the information, I would say, they're going to get from the agency, because they're just not going to know. Let's just put it that way. They're not going to know. So there is a lot of responsibility on the agency to make sure they understand those key growth components and anticipate things correctly within that process. Now, it is the responsibility of the person doing the TIA study to gather the correct information. So if it does exist and they're not gathering that correct information, then yeah, that's kind of their fault. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question there.
It does indeed. Okay, over to the audience now. I see Prince Tamba has their hand raised, so let me you can unmute yourself, I believe. I'm not even sure I can unmute you. Prince Tamba, if you can hear us, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, Adam.
Hi.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh, good. Thank you very much for this presentation. Good manual so far. I was, towards the tail end of the presentation, I was waiting to hear what could be those typical solutions, because I assume a developer will not just hire a consultant for the purpose of just knowing what is the existing situation. I think they also like to know what could be the practical solutions based on all of the data that you collected. I was waiting to hear, assuming you have a development size that you require to do a TEA level 3, what could be those practical solutions? Think of having a Walmart somewhere and your developer comes in, hey, we want to be able to optimize, the traffic. So what could be those basic recommendation? Would it be optimizing the signal timing, expanding the capacity to improve the level of service, configuring the existing alignment? What could be those typical solutions for assuming just a level 3? And also, I was thinking, I'm trying to get out of you what could be a better optimizing solution software. I know what you display looks a little bit like Synchro, which I love. But do you have any optimizing software that you've been working with, that you love working with, that maybe we could recommend to partners, to optimizing the intersections? So I think so far that's it for me. Just like to know what could be typical solutions. Thank you.
Okay, so let me address the first part. So the next workshop, we're going to start talking about we got up to the existing conditions. The next workshop will talk about, the proposed development, impacts to the proposed development. And then we have down here kind of like, proposed mitigations on item 13. So we'll look at more of those future things on the next workshop. And just, again, for this course, since we're covering the manual and we're trying to keep it a little bit more general, we're focusing more on the smaller things in this workshop. But your question about level 3, let me go to that slide. Did I put that slide? Here it is. So you had the question about level 3. So again, when you get to level 3, you could have quite a large study area there. Hopefully, you also have a nice healthy budget to go along with that level 3 analysis. We were saying this could be an office building, a large office building. Maybe you can get away with a smaller tool to use to still do that within a city. But if you're doing something like a football stadium or something like that, that's really generating a lot of traffic and a lot of chaos during its operations, that's going to involve quite a bit of study. So for those type of things, you can't count everywhere, that's obvious. So you're going to probably really rely on the agency's data that's available to get those farther out intersections represented. So that's probably number 1. Number 2, for something like a football stadium, that's clearly a level 3 analysis. A tool like, I don't really want to mention too many software tools because I'm kind of biased, I would say, with my job. But a tool like Synchro, like Vistro, like highway capacity software, that's not going to help you with a football stadium in the middle of a large city. That's the wrong tool selection. You'll probably be looking for more like a larger planning software solution, again, biased, but like a VSUM. I'll also mention AIMSON, and I'll also mention TransCAD, just to be fair. So you'll look at those higher level softwares that could look at the origin destinations and really do more of a macro analysis for this traffic impact study. And then when you identify issues from this macro analysis, maybe potential things come up from these screenings of looking at the origin destination, you could then look at it at a micro level, of course. That could be using simulation software. If you have specific issues, problems, you could look at that level, and then even go back to like your Synchro, your Vistro, your highway capacity stuff for the core signal timing and specific engineering at specific site locations. So that's kind of how the software could be used for level 3, but you can really damage yourself by using the wrong tool for the job. So you just have to kind of understand where you are, where your budget is, and accessibility to tools. So hopefully that's kind of the answer. That sounds like a whole nother course, I would say. I could go on for a long time. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Adam. I'm going to head over to the chat, and we received, I think, 2 kind of fairly related questions. And Adam, perhaps you had an opportunity to check them. Part of the issue in African cities, but they're not unique in that perspective, of course, is linked to the availability of parking space. And this contributes through a lot of search traffic, but of course, vehicles sometimes parked in designated driving lanes, which is always a little bit unfortunate. What does the TIA process tell us about, the amount of parking that can be developed, particularly in the context of commercial developments? And at the same time, we know that the pathway to sustainability is through, enhanced public transport use. So how can we kind of help city planners and modelers, make the correct these correct kind of arbitrations, these trade-offs between more capacity, more parking capacity, and the alternative? Thank you.
That's a good question. So in this manual, I believe it was towards the back. I have to open it up and look at it again, but I believe towards the back there's some generic or general parking guidance. So it will give you some basic parking, rates. I would say rates for what a office building might actually produce, or what a restaurant might produce for something like this. So that's kind of like the place to start. Is you have to use information. I know the ITE, which is the Institute of Transportation Engineers, they have a parking generation manual. It is geared towards more of the US, of course, but they have a generation manual, and within that manual, they will say, like, if you have a site of this size, this is recommendation of how many parking spaces you might need for this site. Also, again, not to pick on agencies too much, but I mean, there are, with the zoning and the type of site that you're putting on in the development, the zoning may dictate how many parking spaces you will actually need for that site. For example, a hospital, often they have it related to the number of beds that a hospital has. So if you have like 100 beds, you need, I don't know, 50 parking spaces or something like that, or maybe 75 parking spaces. And that's all dictated on zones, zoning regulations. But the real issue is, do you have space to put it in? I mentioned that in Germany, I mean, they don't have nearly enough parking for what they're putting in, but they're okay with that because they have really good transportation infrastructure to bring in people from transit and public transport and biking and pedestrians. So the TIA process, when I was going into that modal split, this can also help where you can reduce the number of trips going to your site by saying, we're also going to mitigate a lack of parking by increasing the capabilities of people to get there by other modes. So that can also be considered. Of course, if, like I was saying, if there's really no connection to get there, and you're assuming that people are going to use bikes, but there's no bike path, you can't really make that assumption unless you want to pay for a really long bike path to get to your site. Hopefully there's policies in place by agencies. They're aware of the issue that they want to move towards these other modes, that the agency policy reflects this, and they actually enforce it. They enforce sites to provide this infrastructure to get to their place of business. So it's not an easy question. I'm sorry, I can't really answer that one so much, but it's going to take a lot of coordination between agencies, policy, and developers, I guess, to solve is the best answer.
Thank you. And I know that you do plan to touch upon the topic of parking again in our next session together. I'd like to turn over to Niji Labi and thank him for his patience. Niji, I think you have a question or comment to make, so please unmute yourself and share your thoughts and observations with us. And Niji, you're currently muted. There you go.
Okay. I'm here. Thank you very much, Dave and Brandon, for this excellent presentation. And I will speak probably in French and English. I think there is two kind of, let's say, people who are in this session. People from the cities, from agencies, and our, let's say, professional on traffic and transportation. And this presentation shows how to do this traffic impact study, but we don't know in our cities The first thing is to make this an obligation for any development coming to the city. But the city, I think, is responsible everywhere in Africa for the construction authorization. So people, they want to get this authorization, so they have to go to the city and ask for this. But never the city asked for this traffic impact assessment study for this development. What is the impact of this development on the traffic, on the surrounding streets, and what mitigation measures we have to do? First of thing, I think for our cities, we need to make this obligation, an obligation for any development, because level 1 or level 2 or level 3, we know it when we have to make this trip generation, and we know there is more than 100 cars or between 100 and 500, etc., to know the level. But we need to know and to have this study done by the promoter, private sector or the government when they invest in hospitals, schools, big institution in the middle of the city center sometimes, and there is no traffic impact assessment study, and we are dealing with more than 2,000 or 100 or 300 or 3,000 traffic per hour, and we have the congestion, we have everything. But after getting this development done, we see that we have a problem. But this problem can be analyzed before getting to construct this development, and we can make this mitigation measures and optimize the using of every mode of the infrastructure around this development, in this development itself, and access to the roads, etc. So I think first of the things is this. For our professional team from the bank, we have this kind of problems that we are investing a lot of on roads, and these roads sometimes are in the city and around the city, the ring roads, the interchanges, and from city to city we have roads also who enters two or three or many cities in the same time. But we do the studies of traffic without taking any account about this impact on the urban let's say zones that the road is connecting or traversing, etc. The traffic impact study of this road, it has an impact, and especially in urban areas, they have a lot of impacts. So if we don't study this correctly, we are out, and the road, instead of developing or improving traffic circulation and time, we will have problems in crossing the cities, and we will lose this time gained in other sections. So it's a must that we do in our studies this traffic impact assessment in around the cities, in the cities, when entering and when crossing, etc. This is my point of comments. I think Tamba is aware about this softwares and many things. He knows probably more than many people who are first time, I think they hear about this traffic impact assessment study. There is a lot of things that you need to have in your cities before getting to this analysis. I think the trip generation and the trip parking, etc., the parking generation, etc., etc. Our bank will help all the countries in Africa to get this different type of trip generation and parking generation in urban areas, probably not in each city, but by country or by region. We will discuss after this webinars probably to how to get this on ground with internally and with the different people here present, how the bank can help to get this. We know that the American, they have the trip generation handbook, the highway capacity manual, highway they have a lot of things, so they just need to go to the page X and Y and etc., and they find the trip generation, the parking generation, the everything. For every land use, you have mixed land use, commercial, cinema, cultural, etc., etc. You have everything, and this trip generation handbook is about I don't know 2,000 pages. You have for different hours of the day, the morning, the afternoon, at night. For stadium, for example, it's occasional that the stadium is working, probably during the matches and etc. They have all this trip generation and they have all these things that you don't need to. But this is for America. It's not for Africa. Africa,
Right.
they have their own manners of traveling, of doing things, of parking, of getting on the road, of occupying the road, etc. So things must be done for different countries, probably East region, Central region, North, etc. We can find some funds, and my colleagues here can probably correct me, that we can help these different countries to get this. It's a question of doing many counts in different areas, specific areas, and to get this different land uses. Probably the West region are 80 to 90% common land uses in different cities. East region is etc. I did this in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is a special country. With there is no cinema, there is no things at 12, 15 years ago. But we did this trip generation, and I think you are in Dubai, Brandon and Dave, and you know that they have their own trip generation book, etc. And they have their attitude for moving. They move at night. It's very hot. They have different days of working days. It's not the same as America. Friday it's off, and they go afternoon. They go from 6 p.m. to 12 a.m. tomorrow. So different things are different. So African also, they have their behavior, and they need to get this trip generation books for at least different regions, and to help the people getting at least for the first point that you raised, this type of analysis, the TIA analysis. Is it type 1 or type 2 or type 3? We need this trip generation rates. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, those are
Thank you
that's great. Great feedback.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing those observations, Neji. And I want to take this opportunity also to highlight, and to kind of compliment the African Development Bank for taking the step really of creating these new the new traffic impact assessment guidelines. Again, we've shared the link in the chat, and you're quite correct that on its own they need to be completed with further manuals, further kind of further models that are probably more applicable to the regional context, such as of course the trip generation models in particular. And this suggests that additional work is needed really to kind of the traffic engineering fundamentals may remain the same. So of course their application in these specific variables would need to be adjusted. Adam, I'm going to give you the closing word, but I also want to say to share a few thoughts about what's going to happen next with the upcoming workshop. So Adam, if there are any kind of quick responses, there's a lot that Neji shared with us, which we probably need to build on as part of the next webinar. But if you have some kind of immediate thoughts, please do go ahead.
I would first off just say I totally agree. I mean, the TIA process is not, I mean, I was in quality assurance and in that kind of world for a while. And if you don't have people actually requiring something, then the process isn't worth having in the first place, right? So you need somebody to actually enforce the usage of the process itself for it to work. So that is a very critical point. But to build on this, I mean, as far as providing specific infrastructure, maybe for more bicycle, more buses, more things like this, there's been some successful public-private partnership kind of things where, maybe a development gets a tax break if they're helping, support some infrastructure for bicycles or pedestrians or for transit. So there has been those successful partnerships, and it may not just be like one developer. It could be multiple developers that chip in to kind of continue this along a corridor and make sure that corridor or that block works really well. I mean, just on top of my head, like, you know, I'm thinking more about American businesses, but like, you know, there's this REI business, which is like a hiking and supply store for going out in the wilderness and stuff like this. They're really active in like all of these types of programs, and they even give money to fund these programs. Of course, they're getting a benefit out of it because that's their business. It aligns with that business. But that's an opportunity that's also there. You know, IKEA is another thing that comes into mind. They spend a lot of time and a lot of money to make sure their site fits into their local area and works with pedestrians, works with bicycles. They always have plenty of bicycle parking when I go there. So yeah, I think agencies can kind of, you know, maybe come up with some programs to kind of influence these developers to actually do something beneficial for multi-modes. So
Thank you very much. There's also a comment that came in the chat. You know, we referenced briefly in the introduction the opportunities for, you know, technology leaps and not necessarily going through exactly the same sequences. And I think as part of the next webinar in this track, we'll be talking a little bit about intersection management, and perhaps we can bring in a technology angle here, and how can we use the latest in perhaps cooperative ITS and artificial intelligence to fluidify these intersections. These are technologies that are available today at a much lower price point than they would have been even 5 years ago, and they were completely science fiction 15 years ago. So there is an opportunity perhaps to do more with those, and we will be covering this as part of the next webinar. I'm briefly going to say a few words about the, if I can find the share function. And there it is. Just to remind you where we stand now in the program. My apologies for that. So we will be revisiting the topic of traffic impact assessments with Adam. In fact, he will be joining us in Accra as well. And but I also want to mention that next Wednesday, we will be convening our first webinar as part of the other track on an equally important topic, the topic of traffic safety. And here we're going to be talking a lot about, as we think of initiatives to promote, we spoke briefly about cycle lanes, about transit users, etc. What are some of the engineering and planning measures that are required to ensure that these modes of travel are made as safe as possible? It's a huge challenge for Africa. We have a great speaker on this topic, Dr. Jean-François Giselle, who briefly introduced this area as part of the orientation webinar last week. And so please do join us next week for a discussion around non-motorized transport and how to make those transit users, those vulnerable road users, safer. Again, please take note of this in-person event this time, the Africa Regional Congress. It will be held in Accra, and earlier you may have seen in the chat we were surveying you about you know, your city of origin, and I saw that there are a number of participants from Accra, and I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce my colleague Patrick Becco, who is based in Accra, who will be one of the main coordinators of this event. Patrick, I understand you're still on the line. If you want to maybe unmute yourself and present, you know, yourself and, you know, why we should consider participating in this this you know, milestone event for the region.
Thank you, Brendan. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Patrick.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you all for participating in this important webinar. Well, we look forward to having all of you to Accra, the capital city of Ghana. And this conference is going to be, or Congress is going to be a confluence between academia and industrial practitioners in the city of Accra. We've made a lot of arrangements in terms of hotels, and the main hotels that we'll be using will be the Accra City Hotel, which is about 2 kilometers away from the venue. In terms of those from the Francophone countries, feel free. We'll be providing French translation, and we invite you all to Accra. Accra certainly has a lot of historical value, so when you come around, you will also get opportunity to visit most of the historical sites in Ghana, and also some beaches around. We look forward to a successful conference, and where we'll have not only those from Africa, but also internationally. We will be expecting a lot of participants from Europe and the US. So with this, Brendan, I want to hand over to you, and hopefully as we prepare towards this all-important conference, we'll have all of you attending. And once again, go to our website. The link is there, and you'll have other instructions there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Patrick. And for us, I think an opportunity to visit your country and your city for the first time. There's a very inspiring program which we're in the process of putting together, and an ongoing call for abstracts, which is open for another 2 weeks. So please do send in your abstract. And as I said, we will waive registration fees for the public sector participants participating in this program. Patrick, I know you very kindly offered to provide some additional guidance for any questions that may come in, and we will take the liberty of sharing your email address with the participants. With this said, I would like to extend again our thanks and the thanks of the African Development Bank for participating in this first webinar, and we look forward to seeing all of you next week to discuss traffic safety. Once again, you will be receiving a copy of the presentation and of the recording, and this will be sent within a couple of hours. Thank you very much, and have a great and safe rest of the day.
Merci, merci, merci.
Thank you. Merci.
Tu peux revenir.